Badbird presents Seat of the Allfather. Written by J. Isaac. This is Episode 9, The Feast. Max was in a state of shock when they returned to the house that night. Not a word was said on the walk back, nor when they split off to their separate bedrooms. His face was still tender from the blow he had received from Sully, and the fear inspired by the act sat in his gullet like a poisonous seed. The bedroom had no lock, so in desperation, Max pulled the desk chair over and attempted to wedge the door closed. Then, he pulled off his coat and shoes, and quickly climbed under the covers, hiding his head beneath the pillow. He lay there like that for a long time, shaking. A myriad of confusion traveled its way through his mind. Thoughts of his mother and father. Thoughts of escape. Thoughts of an eternity spent there, of losing his mind in the forest and flame. Suddenly, a strange noise began to build outside his bedroom window. High-pitched whines and yelps, barking and howling from a distance. He cautiously exited the blankets and approached the glass. The fire in the woods was just a speck of light in the distance, and he could see nothing else. The sound grew to a riotous pitch. Wrapping himself in a blanket, he pulled the chair away from the door and exited the room. His footsteps fell silent on the carpeted stairs, and he was soon moving through the dark main floor towards the back of the house. He started to see a dark figure standing in the kitchen, staring out of the large windows into the woods. His foot struck a piece of furniture, and the figure turned.
Max?
It was George's voice.
Max, baby, you need to go to bed. It's so late.
Her voice was surprisingly gentle. Max took a deep breath and felt relief.
What is that noise out there? It's so loud.
Georgia shook her head.
It's nothing. Some coyotes or wild dogs must have found the goats. The noise should die down soon.
Max turned to go.
Max.
He turned and looked back, and saw that Georgia was facing out the windows again.
Sully didn't mean to hurt you. Don't take it too hard. He cares for you.
Max returned to the bedroom and hid under the blankets once more. He thought about Lewis and the old man in the woods. He thought about how he could really use the old man's help now. Sarah Lorne lay in bed, with wires and tubes of every description running from her body like the tendrils of a creeping ivy. The hum of the hospital's operation was a calming influence, allowing her to drift in and out of sleep for much of the day. The heavy narcotics also helped with the sleep. The television was on, displaying the weather of every county in the state. The sound of footsteps coming through the door caused her to open one eye. Someone was approaching, holding a bouquet of red flowers. The blossoms obscured the newcomer's face for a moment, until he set them down on the nightstand and turned to face her. Her eyes widened, and her mouth gaped suddenly. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The attempt alone sent shivers of pain up and down her torso. The old man held up a hand and shook his head slightly, pulling a chair beneath him.
Don't Speak, Sarah.
The old man sighed and clasped his hands together, resting them on his knees. He then looked at Sarah intently.
James treated the two of you to quite the experience.
She closed her eyes at his words, a tear slipping out and running its way down her cheek. The old man continued.
What did you tell him? Does he know anything about where the boy is?
Sarah sniffed and shook her head.
I don't think so.
The words came out haltingly, and the sound had a coarse quality to it. The old man studied the woman.
I hope that is true. The McEnroses are good stewards. I would hate to see that man interrupt their process.
A small smile began to creep across the old man's face.
True, they are, well, a bit strange, to put it generously. But they practice the principles I've given them. There are none more loyal.
The man's voice sounded almost prideful. Sarah sniffed again and struggled to wipe the tears out from under her eyes. At the sight, the smile disappeared from the old man's face. His posture suddenly softened. Shaking his head, he spoke again.
I feel regret for the way things have gone for you. Lewis, your husband, both dead, returned to the ether. Even so, it bears noting that poor dead Lewis deserves less sympathy than your husband. If you could know the hellfire, the purgatory from which I plucked that boy, you would scarcely believe it. And yet still...
The old man sat back in the chair and looked up in exasperation.
Yet still, he raised a hand against me, against my purpose. In that, I cannot abide.
Sarah now wept softly, her eyes closed shut. The old man watched her in silence. After a moment, she managed to look up at the seated man.
Father,
A cough interrupted her. She regained her composure and continued.
Lewis, he deserved to die.
She clasped her hands together and shook them pleadingly before continuing.
But now that he's gone, I need another one. Please, please, give me another one.
The old man shook his head slowly and stood.
Sarah, you are broken in the most grievous manner. You may die of your injuries.
The old man folded his hands behind his back, and he looked down at Sarah, his blue eyes almost glowing in the dimness of the room.
Most importantly, you are no longer part of a natural unit. A lioness cannot raise a cub without the male's power and influence, and a she-wolf will perish trying to protect a pup alone against the hunger of winter. No. Your time as a mother is over.
The sound of the broadcast changing on the television drew the old man's gaze. The newscaster was speaking energetically, describing the details of a gruesome home invasion that occurred on the other side of the state. On the upper right-hand corner of the screen, a picture of a man was displayed. A person of interest, the caption said.
Oh, James, you are not as careful as you once were.
James felt the warm liquid pooling in his right shoe as he shuffled down the poorly lit street. It had to be almost 3 in the morning. He hadn't expected such a dedicated showing of the city's finest. After he made his exit from the gas station, he thought he had made a clean escape. Unfortunately, that was not the case. 2 squad cars had cut him off several blocks down, forcing a wild chase through the night. James had wrecked his truck on a fire hydrant, and then exchanged shots with the officers. One of them had managed to graze him in the side, causing a fair amount of bleeding, blood that was now leaking down his leg. He thought he might have clipped one of the cops, but he wasn't sure. After the firefight, James had been able to slip into the surrounding alleys and continue by foot. He was now approaching the hospital, just as the adrenaline was beginning to wane in his system. The Loyola Medical Center parking lot was largely empty. The few cars there were clustered around a handful of light poles illuminating the lot. As James stepped over the curb onto the asphalt, he saw headlights approaching the area. He ducked down low in the darkness and watched a dated SUV pull into the lot and park, well away from the other cars in the light. A figure exited the vehicle and began walking to the front doors of the hospital. As the individual passed under the first light pole, long, brilliant white hair was suddenly illuminated. James started. How was this possible? He looked closer and realized that his first instinct was correct. The man now striding through the double doors of Loyola Medical Center was none other than Father. James realized that this was a great opportunity. Now he had no need to wander the halls of the hospital and risk exposure. He could merely wait and catch the old man off guard. He shuffled over to the old man's vehicle and peered through the front passenger window. The interior was bare. James pulled a knife from his waistband and held the tip against the corner of the window. With a swift blow to the butt of the knife, the window crumbled into 1,000 pieces. Quickly, he unlocked the door and swung into the vehicle. He fruitlessly checked the visor for a spare key. He reached over and pulled the glove box open, and was surprised to see a small leather planner sitting amidst the registration papers. Seizing the notebook, his heart began to pound. Every page was covered in a fine handwritten script. Dates, names, addresses, miscellaneous descriptions, and notes. The booklet seemed to be categorized by name. There were individual sections, each headed in large, bold writing. The headings were all names: Samuel, Lynn, Aiden, Esther. There must have been 50 names or more. Lawrence, Daniel, Katie, and finally, Max. An involuntary gasp escaped James' lips as he read the name of his son. Below the heading were 2 other names he didn't recognize. Then there was a date and an address. The date was almost 13 years prior, and the address was unfamiliar. Then another date, 2 more names, and an address. A few brief notes were scribbled below that, trivial descriptive details about the boy. Finally, another date. This one was only a couple of weeks prior. 2 names were written below the date, and an address was indicated. The address was a state away. There was no time to lose. James shifted over to the driver's seat and ripped off the panel beneath the steering wheel. The vehicle's age made the hot wiring a simple task. The engine roared to life as he started it. James could feel the adrenaline beginning to pour back into his veins. It was time to end this. The old man hummed a tune under his breath as he exited the hospital. As he walked, he felt around in his pocket for his car keys. He pulled them out and looked up, suddenly coming to a stop. Where his vehicle had once been, there was now only asphalt littered with broken glass. A police SUV was parked nearby, its lights glowing red and blue. An officer stood nearby, a cell phone pressed to his ear.
Where is my car?
The officer jumped at the sound, turning to see the old man standing next to him. He ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket.
This was your vehicle?
The old man nodded silently.
I got here a few minutes ago. I'm pretty sure the thief is the same guy I've been following from a crime scene, ways up the road. We're trying to locate this man in your vehicle as we speak. What kind of car was this?
1985 Bronco. What kind of scene?
The officer shook his head and threw up his hands.
He's a person of interest in another investigation. Apparently, some folks recognized him at a gas station down the way. He got aggressive and people got hurt.
The old man clasped his hands behind his back.
What other investigation?
The officer shook his head.
Something to do with that woman who was attacked at Mansfield a few weeks ago. I can't say more.
The old man looked down and noticed a spattering of crimson drops on the asphalt next to where his vehicle had been.
I understand. Thank you.
After providing the officer with a phony contact number, the old man turned on his heel and began walking to the hospital. James. It was only a matter of time before he found the journal, and the journal would lead him straight to Max. The old man realized he would have to act quickly if he was to avert disaster.
What is the next step for Max? I think you really upset him the other night.
Sully snorted.
He deserved what he got, and now he knows better. However, all things considered, I think it would be wise to move a little faster with his growth.
How fast?
We need to expose him to the real thing. Get him over the margin. He needs to be a part of it for real. He won't be capable of leaving after that point. You'll be ours. And more importantly, his.
The two looked out of the kitchen window and observed the children playing in the yard. Max stood alone near the edge of the woods, watching the others. Georgia locked eyes with the boy and then spoke in a determined tone.
He needs to be part of the family.
Max sat in a chair in the lounge. It was a spacious room, furnished generously with plush couches and comfortable chairs. All manner of art populated the Roman clay walls. The other children were there as well. Max was hungry, his last meal being almost 2 days prior. Wednesday night, he thought. His stomach felt like a rock, and it throbbed from time to time with the most painful hunger. Georgia had informed him that his last transformation would occur the following night, and that afterwards, they would share a special meal. The other children seemed to be suffering similar to Max. No yard work had been done, and the other children spent the daylight hours sitting and reading or talking quietly amongst themselves. Everyone moved sluggishly, and frequent naps were taken. With each passing hour, a feeling of dread grew stronger and stronger in Max. Now more than ever, he knew he would have to run. He had to escape. The end of episode 9. This has been Seat of the Allfather. Join us next time for episode 10.